Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So the Biden administration, according to reports, is considering allowing Gaza refugees into the United States even as Americans are held hostage, and the Biden administration is failing to secure our own borders. Tennessee Senator Bill Hagerty had this to say on Fox Business.
I certainly am. You can understand the concern. This administration is incapable of maintaining our own southern border. We've got people on the terrorist watch list that are walking across our southern border every day. The thought that the Biden administration could properly vet these people coming from Gaza, where 70% of the citizens of Gaza support what Hamas did on October the 7th, I think it is very hard to imagine that we're not going to see even more introduction of people that would be a danger to our national security if the Biden administration goes through with this $3.5 billion plan that they announced the minute the Senate approved the last major bill that came through the Congress.
This also coming as Congress is increasingly considering defunding the universities that are allowing these violent protests, and Senator Bill Hagerty has now joined the GOP coalition. This headline coming from the Washington Examiner. Hagerty joins chorus of GOP senators stoking efforts to cut funding from universities hosting protests. Senator Bill Hagerty agreed with some of his colleagues in the Senate that federal funding for universities allowing anti-Semitic protesters on its campuses is a, quote, top of mind issue. We just passed through a massive appropriation package, Hagerty said. We'll be looking at the next steps right away. In fact, it's coming up over the course of the next several weeks. This is a top of mind issue for most of the senators. It's even a bipartisan concern. We've got to address this. The campuses have really just let things run wild. So joining me now is Josh Hammer, who is the senior editor at large for Newsweek and the host of the Josh Hammer Show. So Josh, it seems to me that Speaker Johnson and the House coalition, at least of the GOP, might have considered a bill defunding universities instead of this ridiculous anti-Semitic awareness act that really has First Amendment concerns. Your thoughts?
Well, I actually disagree on the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. I don't think that there are any First Amendment concerns. I think that there's actually been a gross amount of mischaracterization as to what the bill actually says and what it does. But that's really neither here nor there, I guess, for present purposes. If you want to go there, Jenna, that's fine. But talking about the foreign funding of universities, here's where I think you and I very much do agree. The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act provides a rule of construction. It advises how the Department of Education should interpret Title VI. It is basically indistinguishable from a December 2019 executive order that the Trump administration promulgated pertaining to the definition of anti-Semitism when it comes to Title VI. But a rule of construction advising or mandating how the Department of Education can interpret a statute is orders of magnitude less important than other steps that Congress can take. And I think this is where you and I definitely agree. There are other steps that are so much more important, holding aside the actual debate over that statute. Here's what Congress should do when it comes to fighting back against anti-Semitism on American university campuses. They should be defunding all foreign funding of American universities. That should be a period, full stop, end of story proposal. I mean, it is common sense, and it is a highly popular political issue. If you go back to the 9/11 attacks of 2001, Jenna, there is one country in particular that has funded American higher ed much more than any other country in the world. What is it? It's Qatar. It is the tiny, extraordinarily wealthy home of Al Jazeera, home of Hamas leadership. They all live, Ismail Haniyeh, they all live right there in five-star resorts in Doha, Qatar. Qatar has given upwards of $5 to $6 billion to American universities. Many so-called prestigious schools such as Northwestern, Cornell, Carnegie Mellon actually have campuses in Doha. There are many other problematic countries as well, Russia and China, you name it, that are giving tons and oodles of country. These foreign universities are brainwashing America's youth. They are hiring horrific anti-American, anti-Western civilization professors. So defunding the universities and stopping this ridiculous importation of third world migrants and Islamists who do not share our values and hate all that the Judeo-Christian West stands for. Those two public policies, I totally agree with you, would do a heck of a lot more than the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, whatever our disagreements may or may not be about that particular legislation.
Yeah, and I always appreciate when we actually disagree, Josh, because that's very rare, and I also really respect your opinions. And nobody has really expressed that type of defense for Speaker Johnson and people like Jim Jordan, who generally go along with conservatism. And I had him on my radio show last week, and he said that he was fine with the language of the bill, which frankly really surprised me. But where we do agree, as you just said, is that the priority should be on defunding these universities. There was a tweet that suggested, and other reports, that Columbia University in particular is receiving somewhere around $1.2 billion of federal aid, and yet they can't manage to enforce the rules of their own administration. They've also said that they've canceled their campus-wide commencement, and this coming as, this is 2024. 4 years ago, students at high schools had their graduations canceled because of the COVID lockdowns. I mean, so this seems just patently ridiculous that Congress hasn't taken step yet, and they're still kind of just considering it.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, what is Congress doing, Jenna? I mean, what is Congress actually doing when it comes to? I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess on any given day, you could probably ask, what is Congress doing? I mean, then they're probably not doing a heck of a lot that is of particular use, let alone ultimately redounds to the common good of the country. But look, I went to law school at the University of Chicago, Jenna. I was looking at the images and videos just this morning at the University of Chicago, where they finally took down their little Gaza, as Senator Tom Cotton has been calling these encampments that pop up, these Soros-funded, Rockefeller-funded encampments there. Where is Congress actually trying to strip funding of universities that are letting this anarchy going on, and then perhaps, I don't know, redistributing it maybe to universities that are actually securing free speech, securing civil rights? We live in the state of Florida. At the University of Florida in Gainesville, Ben Sass had a piece in the Wall Street Journal this weekend talking about what he's been doing there. At the University of Florida in Gainesville, the rules are very simple, Jenna. If you join this encampment in violation of university policy and you are a student, you're expelled. If you are a faculty member, you're fired. Or at least you're fired or expelled for 3 years, and you can reapply or whatnot there. That is the way that it should be done. It's actually very straightforward and commonsensical. Perhaps Congress should get in the business of trying to steer these institutions toward the values and the policies of places like the University of Florida and away from the policies of places like Columbia University.
Yeah, but it seems like a lot of members of Congress are either hesitant to do that for political and optics concerns, or they share the values of the protesters, at least to the extent that the Democrats might. But, Ben Sass had a really great interview with Jake Tapper on CNN, where he drew that exact contrast, where he said, listen, we laud freedom of speech, but there's a difference between speech versus conduct, and the university is going to enforce it. There are always strings attached with federal funding. Why not now? What is Congress doing? That is the big question. Josh Hammer, really appreciate it. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Throughout history, there are clear moments that define our nation's path, and now you can own a piece of that history. I'm thrilled to announce the official Newt Gingrich contract with America coin from our friends at Legacy Precious Metals in partnership with Speaker Gingrich. This limited edition 1 ounce 99.99% silver coin commemorates the historic victory in 1994 when the Republican Party, under Speaker Gingrich's guidance, took control of Congress. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin also symbolizes the transformative political platform that led to the landmark achievements like the overhaul of the U.S. welfare system and the Balanced Budget Act. This is a limited edition coin that will sell out. So whether you're looking for the perfect gift or you want to own a piece of history, act fast before they run out. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin is more than an investment. It's a tribute to honest government and America. You can order it online at newtgingrichsilvercoin.com. That's newtgingrichsilvercoin.com, and use promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, to get $10 off your purchase. Go to newtgingrichsilvercoin.com now. Well, Joe Biden's party's radical leftism may be backfiring as there are concerns about the DNC and protests. This headline coming from the Washington Examiner. Democrats expecting massive show of force from protesters at the Democrat National Committee party. So the Democrat Party is bracing for massive protests during the Democrat National Committee convention in Chicago in August, reminiscent of the chaos of the 1968 convention. Fears of a repeat of the infamous convention, which saw hundreds arrested, have been thrown around as the Israel-Hamas war continues, and as massive campus protests that have paralyzed several universities have further illustrated what may be in store for the Chicago DNC convention in August. Quote, this last week has taken the demonstrations to a different level, former President Barack Obama's chief of staff, William Daley, told the Washington Post. It portends that you have the potential for big demonstrations. Whether they get violent, that's more imaginable today than it was just a year ago. And meanwhile, social media is poking a little bit of fun at some of the protesters. This coming from X account from Emily Zanotti saying, wait, the kids at Columbia spelled Palestine wrong. It says Free Palestine with an A. And there was a community note to the video that was quote tweeted in this particular post saying that this may have been in Canada. But either way, hopefully we can spell Palestine correct. But let's bring in Marc Lotter, who's the Chief Communications Officer for AFPI, the America First Policy Institute. So, Marc, I mean, universities clearly aren't teaching anything if the kids can't even get Palestine correct in their spray paint. But Joe Biden's whole position on all of this seems to be backfiring leading into August and the DNC convention.
Yeah, this is all a problem of his creation. In fact, it was like fully on display last night in New York when you had the woke, radical, snowflake, pro-terrorist base of the Democrat Party march and basically protest the Met Gala, which is a bougie, custom-designed dresses, $75,000 a ticket, where all the liberal elites go to celebrate their own greatness. And so they were basically tearing each other apart last night, which of course I love to see. But I think it's just a preview of what we're going to see in Chicago, because all of these little snowflakes are going to be out of college. They've got months to organize this protest. And unlike the Vietnam protesters, who, whether you agreed with them or disagreed with them, they were protesting American boys being drafted and sent to die in Vietnam, a country obviously half a world away. Right now, you're basically protesting because Israel was attacked. 1,200 Israelis and Jewish men, women, and children were murdered, slaughtered, and Israel is defending itself.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised we haven't yet seen AOC wearing a dress with, Free Palestine with an A on the back in red paint. She could have shown up at the Met Gala last night. But, all of this really isn't great for the Biden administration heading into November. And so there was another piece in Axios earlier today that suggested that the Biden ads are going to start targeting some of Trump's policies that he has and his campaign have suggested, harken back to the good old days of his 4 years and how we kind of all have this nostalgia around the 4 years of this administration. And I think rightly so. I mean, we all had better gas prices, better food, America was secure, all of these things. And so Biden is trying to target those ads to say, hey, it wasn't as good as you remember it. I don't think he's going to be that successful, though.
No, I mean, they're targeting immigration policy, and look what's going on at the southern border. And so basically trying to say that Trump's policies deterred immigration. Well, that's what you're supposed to do, Joe. Again, it just shows you how out of touch they are, because people correctly remember that gas was low, groceries were affordable, kids could afford rent or to maybe even buy their first home. The world was not at war. Everything Joe Biden has touched has turned into a complete and utter disaster, and no amount of advertising is going to change that fact. This is why when you look at the 7 swing states, Donald Trump's not just leading in 1 or 2 of them, he's leading in all of them. And all he has to do is win 2 or 3 of them to win the White House. He's also leading in the national polls, something that was never happening in 2019 or 2020, even before COVID. And so Joe Biden knows he's made a mess of his presidency. The American people don't like it. And we see more young voters, more Black Americans, more Latino voters coming back and going, you know what? I just don't like what Joe Biden has done. I'm going back to the policies that worked.
Yeah, and I mean, this is almost shades of 2016. And even though thankfully we never had a President Hillary Clinton, that election was more either for Hillary or against Hillary. And Trump won that election, even though, not sure that she agrees with that. But that's that's what we're in a setup to be, is that Joe Biden is actually running against himself. And speaking of Democrat failures completely, there is the continuation of the trial of Trump with those 34 counts out of New York. And Stormy Daniels testified today. But as much as this was kind of a big deal, and all of the media were parading this out and saying that this is going to be the death nail for the Trump team, it seems to have backfired. Your thoughts?
Yeah, today's Christmas for the left-wing media. Like, they woke up happier today than they probably do on any other day of the week. But here's my question, and I'll defer to you, Jenna, because you're an attorney. I just play one on TV sometimes. But of all of this testimony, none of it had to do with payments in 2017 or bookkeeping in 2017. There was nothing about the non-disclosure agreement, which is not illegal. There's nothing about campaign finance violations, which the federal government say didn't occur. I mean, this today proved to me that this case has nothing to do with 2016. It has nothing to do with the rule of law. It is all about the 2024 election, and they don't even care if they get overturned, if they're able to get a conviction, which I don't think they will. But they don't even care if they get overturned by a court of appeals. They just want to have Trump locked in a courtroom, air dirty laundry that has nothing to do with this case, and pray they get a conviction. But if not, at least they've gotten to do this for 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, and keep him off the campaign trail. But that's such a great point, Mark, that this judge is allowing Stormy Daniels to testify, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with, the alleged campaign finance violations. Meanwhile, the same judge did not allow campaign finance experts to testify on behalf of Trump's defense. So, so you're getting these witnesses that are totally irrelevant to the actual legal issue at hand, and yet he's excluding very relevant testimony from experts. And we've also seen, the gag orders and those contempt of court violations. But just real quick, if Trump ends up in jail, do you think that'll hurt or harm his or be a good thing for his campaign?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think people will see this for what it is. And when they let him out, they might as well include the keys to the White House with it.
Yeah, well said. Marc Lotter from AFB, I really appreciate it. As always, we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, friends, you might have heard that Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way that they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, so they want to pass along the savings directly to you by having a $25 extravaganza. I love that word, extravaganza. When Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company. With the help of his dedicated employees, they now have hundreds of products, some you may not even know about. To get the word out, I want to invite my listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use My Pillows are just $25. My Pillow sandals, also awesome, only $25. Their 6-pack towel sets are $25. And brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, just $25. For the first time ever, the premium My Pillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. And orders over $75 will receive free shipping too. This amazing offer won't last long. Go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Jenna, or call 800-564-8475 today. That's 800-564-8475, or go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Jenna. Meanwhile, cultural Marxism is also infecting denominations worldwide of the church. This headline coming from Christianity Today: United Methodists overwhelmingly overturned a measure that barred gay clergy from ordination in the denomination, a historic step for the nation's second largest Protestant body. Joining me now is Ryan Helfenbein, who is the Vice President of Communications for Liberty University and also a seminary grad and theologian himself. And so, Ryan, thanks for coming on. And this is concerning on multiple levels, but also Christianity Today seemed to craft this headline as if this is a good thing, overturned a ban that was barring gay clergy, as if, hey, we're now these welcoming Christians. But the question, I think, is, do you want to be a Christian or do you not?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. It's very troubling. Just looking at the history of the United Methodist Church. I mean, this was a denomination that was never intended to be one. You go back to the founding, John Wesley and Charles Wesley, the two brothers who were a part of the revival movement, both in England and in the United States. It was the American War of Independence that actually severed those Methodists. It was a term of derision at one point because of how they were approaching the gospel. There was a holiness movement. They were steeped in conservatism and in revival, but they separated from the Church of England, and so the denomination was born. And in 1968, the UMC, United Methodist Church, was the largest denomination because it brought together the Evangelical Brethren and the Methodist Episcopal. But Jenna, within that, there were liberals, and they were never quite rooted out. And in many ways, over the decades, in protest, they appointed their own gay affirming clergy, and they even in protest performed civil ceremonies and same-sex ceremonies in defiance of the church's teaching. And as late as 2019, the denomination in strong terms said that that gay marriage is outside of Christian doctrine and Christian teaching. It is outside of the sacred scriptures. And so what happened, they were one of the last mainline Protestant denominations to fall on this issue. They were holding the line largely because of conservative parishes, including African Methodists, who are keeping this from happening and holding the line. Were far more conservative than their brothers in the United States.
Yeah, and so, a lot of people who are more concerned about maybe political things, they're saying, okay, well, who cares really that that now some of the clergy, their sexual orientation, or the United Methodists that are allowing, female pastors, for example. But when you get these types of progressive leftist infiltration into churches, it ultimately waters down what the church stands for. So this is a big issue. And why should conservatives who maybe aren't even Christians actually care about this?
Absolutely, we care about the integrity of the Christian church and all Christian denominations, so called. It absolutely matters. It's not a question of whether we're going to have church in the United States. It's which kind. And I think at the end of the day, you don't want a false, fake representation of the Christian faith. You want one that is authentic. And for the longest time, America was strengthened by Christians in this country, forming and shaping the spiritual and moral conscience of the nation, calling the nation to repentance and faith in Jesus Christ. So it's absolutely critical, even for those who are thinking purely in geopolitical terms, that the United States does not forfeit integrity, especially when it comes to marriage, the family, and most importantly, the church itself.
So well said, Ryan. And, we are a nation that's built on the Judeo Christian ethic and all of law. That is the measurable difference between right and wrong. What we prohibit in this society, what we allow or permit in this society, has to come from someone's values. And when the church is either watered down or ceases to be effective in the culture, then we see a lot of this rise of cultural Marxism, what we're seeing from the progressive left, and we're seeing the really the roots of that false value that now pervade our university campuses, because the church is no longer being effective largely across America in teaching the next generation to be wholesome and have values. And so even for conservatives who maybe aren't Christians, like Richard Dawkins, who even calls himself, he's an atheist, but he says he's a cultural Christian. And that's so fascinating because even he recognizes that the Christian ethic is the foundation that a moral and upright society is built upon.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree. And the church becomes, in many ways, it becomes the compass and the guide for the nation. When you go into some of these churches that are flying the rainbow flag and these deconstructionists are on the side of the Marxist, there goes not only the church, but there goes the nation as well. And so you're absolutely right. It is so important that churches hold the line on biblical truth, on doctrine, on orthodoxy. All of those things are absolutely fundamental to a free and a flourishing society. And when those moral foundations and spiritual foundations crumble, all hell literally breaks loose.
Yeah, and we're seeing that across college campuses in the nation, where the administrations are even failing to hold disciplinary action according to their own rules. And so, if there is no real difference between right and wrong, and everyone can act upon my truth or your truth, then it becomes a question for these administrators of, well, how can we really enforce our rules? Upon what premise can we tell these people that they're wrong for their actions? And so, of course, we in America have fundamentally freedom of speech, freedom of association, but conduct is different. And I think for those who draw the line rightly between speech and action are getting it right, but we are failing largely to invest that principle and that value in the next generation. But Liberty University is different.
Yeah, Liberty University is different. And I thank you for pointing that out. We have a Christian founding, we have a Christian mission, a Christian confession, and we are holding the line. But we're just 50 years from our founding, Lord willing. By the grace and mercy of God, we continue to maintain that faithfulness and fidelity to. To the Christian scriptures. But you look at Brown University, you look at places like Harvard, Princeton, Yale. All of these were previously divinity schools of yesteryear, and they forfeited the ghost many, many, many years ago when it came to Christian doctrine. And then they went the way of secularism, they went the way of the Enlightenment, and they deconstructed. And so now you're absolutely right. You know, our rights and privileges as citizens, free speech, it's a responsibility. And it doesn't allow us
Yeah,
to
and I'm
succumb to the.
glad that Liberty is teaching that to our kids. And speaking of Gen Z, we have a lot more to talk about with Ryan Helfenbein right after the break. Throughout history, there are clear moments that define our nation's path, and now you can own a piece of that history. I'm thrilled to announce the official Newt Gingrich contract with America coin from our friends at Legacy Precious Metals in partnership with Speaker Gingrich. This limited edition 1 ounce, 99.99% silver coin commemorates the historic victory in 1994 when the Republican Party, under Speaker Gingrich's guidance, took control of Congress. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin also symbolizes the transformative political platform that led to the landmark achievements like the overhaul of the U.S. welfare system and the Balanced Budget Act. This is a limited edition coin that will sell out. So whether you're looking for the perfect gift or you want to own a piece of history, act fast before they run out. The Newt Gingrich contract with America coin is more than an investment. It's a tribute to honest government and America. You can order it online at newtgingrichsilvercoin.com. That's newtgingrichsilvercoin.com, and use promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, to get $10 off your purchase. Go to newtgingrichsilvercoin.com now. Continuing the conversation with Ryan Helfenbein, who is the Vice President of Communications at Liberty University and also the Executive Director of the Standing for Freedom Center, where, Ryan, you teach students who are the future movers and shakers of this country to have principles, to be good citizens, to understand the measurable difference between right and wrong, good and evil. And there are a segment of Gen Zers, and we've been having this conversation for several months now, that are pointing toward a different answers than really the founding of America would suggest is in the best interest for a well-ordered and free society. So this post came from Evan Kilgore, who is a Gen Zer and either was or possibly still is an ambassador for Turning Point USA. And he posted this photo that shows the Crusades, actually, and then posted this text: America is a Christian nation founded on biblical principles. We're going to turn it into a Christian theocracy, whether the Democrats, atheists, fake Republicans, and Zionists like it or not. Who's with me? I posted a response to this and said, no, America was founded on biblical principles which expressly provide for religious freedom, not state compulsion, and certainly not a theocracy. If the next generation fails to understand the church and the state are distinct institutions and have different jurisdictional authority, they will learn the hard way that history repeats itself for those who fail to study it. So, Ryan, I think that a lot of even the well meaning Gen Zers who see the problems with cultural Marxism are now turning toward Christian nationalism, turning toward America becoming a theocracy, and they're failing to realize this distinction that Thomas Jefferson wrote so eloquently in the letter to the Danbury Church, saying, the church is not over the state. Pastors don't control the office holders. And then likewise, the state can't inform or compel, and certainly not prohibit, pastors what they teach. That is such an important distinction that I think is being lost on a lot of these young people.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I appreciate your response to that tweet. The thing that's misguided is understanding that in the beginning, that what gave rise and the impetus behind the founding of America and the American experiment, it started when those who were fleeing from a more theocratic, authoritarian church order of a church and state kind of fusion and unification, whether it be at the Vatican or the Church of England, they were fleeing religious persecution. Many of the Puritans, the Separatists, the Baptists, all of those were considered mutton in the old world, and they wanted to come to a new place and found America, the colonies, on a form of religious liberty. Now, theocrats, the problem with theocracy, pure and simple, is everyone wants to be theo, right? God doesn't run theocracies, theocrats do. We don't need Christian Ayatollah. But when you go to America's founding, 1776, 1788, there was an informal establishment. I think we all can acknowledge that as Christians, an informal establishment that certainly the Christian faith, the Christian religion was the fundamental support to our free society and informed the Constitution. 9 of the 13 colonies had an established church, but at the federal level, no, absolutely not. And the founders were critical on that in regard to making sure that at the federal level, no church was established. But for more than 150 years, the reigning predominant influence in our society, religious influence, was absolutely Christianity. 1892, the Holy Trinity versus the United States. In that ruling, it was David J. Brewer, on the Supreme Court. He was a judge. He said that America is a Christian nation, and not in terms of covenant or creed or law, but it's certainly with regard to the majority of its people. By observation, that's absolutely true. So we need to re-Christianize this country. That has to do with free exercise of religion, not the establishment of a church at the federal level, but through preaching the gospel and winning souls to Jesus Christ. That is the way you re-Christianize the country. It is through freedom, and it is for freedom that Christ set us free. So I think that there is a longing among the Gen Z to see real, authentic Christianity restored in the public square, but that's going to come through winning people to Christ, not through compelling them to conversion.
Yeah, so well said. And, we saw that history, even, all the way back to Constantine, when, he became a Christian and then tried to compel the Christians to, in terms of Christianity, prolifically through the nation. And then we saw that people were then false Christians. And we've seen examples of, for example, blasphemy laws, that then it just depends on who is the arbiter of what God says for the church that is then over the state. There are so many different problems with theocracy. And from a standpoint of the founding, while we have religious freedom and good speech is always the antidote to bad speech, and we need more speech so that we can persuade, the founders also recognized that our rights come from God, our creator, that's the God of the Bible, and the sole purpose of a legitimate government is to preserve and protect those rights. And so we have a moral obligation in society to ensure that our laws are just, and we can't have true justice. We can only have this social justice or these reinventions of those terms if we create law apart from the person of truth, who is God. And certainly Christians need to advocate for objective morality. But what we can't do is say that then the church needs to have any sort of authority practically over governors and mayors and office holders. And all of the fallout from that, I think, Ryan, is what a lot of these Christian nationalists miss because they misunderstand the founding, or they simply want to reinvent America and they want to get rid of the Constitution because they know that the Constitution provides more freedom than it does any sort of authority for the state or the church to impose things like blasphemy laws. And I think it's very dangerous.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a problem among secularists today. They've taken our American founding for granted. I think there's also a problem with those who might be on the theocratic side, who also take our founding for granted. We have always been a country that it celebrates religious liberty, but namely, we were a country that was founded as a Christian society, a free society of denominations. We just at the federal level never declared an official one, and so there are a lot of misgivings today and misunderstandings, especially among those so-called, whatever it might be, Christian nationalism or whatnot, but not fully understanding or appreciating that the freedom ultimately was informed by the Christian faith. And so we have to
Right.
get to some sense of recovery of those principles.
Yeah, so well said. And it seems like such an easy fix to just say, oh, well, since we are a Christian nation, we want to compel everyone to have to obey the church and have to attend church. But that's not what our founding was all about. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, even though I don't agree with the Gen Zers and the Christian nationalists who want to impose a theocracy on America, I do agree that something needs to be done to preserve and protect liberty and freedom genuinely in America and our founding constitution, because we've seen the rise of totalitarianism and also cultural Marxism as we've continued to discuss. So, a brand new book is from Auron MacIntyre, who is a writer at The Blaze, and it's titled The Total State: How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies. So Auron joins me now. And Auron, this seems like this is a very timely topic because we've seen, the rise of the FISA reauthorization, all of the COVID compulsory attempts by the government, and it seems like more and more of our freedoms are being eroded away. So, what is the solution?
Well, Jenna, I wrote the book because I saw exactly the type of things that you saw, this phenomenon of our rights being slowly eroded. When we think about the total state, we think about totalitarianism, we think about jackboots, right? The Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, gulags, these kind of things, censorship, Politburos. But now we're seeing these things happen in the United States. We're seeing people being silenced. We're seeing people thrown in jail for disagreeing with the government, for having political opposition. We're seeing our different rights be eroded. And of course, you and I, being conservatives, being on the right, we learned that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were going to stop all of this stuff, that the perfectly balanced checks and balances and restrictions of powers and separation of powers built into the Constitution would stop the total state when it came. And so I wrote the book to kind of explain what happened here, how we got to this point, why it's been difficult for us to recognize this kind of march of totalitarianism, and the things that we can do to go ahead and reinstall those boundaries on the state that are held sacred by many Americans.
Yeah, and I think a key word that you just said there, Auron, was actually recognizing this because, from my view, it's really concerning when you see people, even on the so-called right, who are advocating for censorship of their political opposition. And it's fine if Elon Musk throws off certain accounts off of Twitter because they didn't like them, rather than recognizing that principles and freedom belongs to everyone, even people that we vehemently disagree with. And so it seems like this recognition of liberty and freedom and the principles that were at the foundation of America that truly make us great are being lost even on the right.
Well, as I explained in the book, I think the thing that we have lost, the thing we don't understand, even if we look back into the Federalist Papers, Federalist 51, right? Power should check power. That's what Madison told us. That's what the separation of powers is about. But actually, he's drawing on the theory of Baron de Montesquieu, who is a key figure in the writing of the Constitution and the political theory that the founders drew upon. And he understood that it wasn't just the separation of powers or the natural limits on the government mechanically built in the Constitution that actually creates these boundaries that limits the state's power. It's actually what animates these branches, what gives them the power to limit each other, is actually the social forces that they inhabit: the church, the family, the merchant class, the aristocracy, the government itself. Each part of these is a competing sphere in society. And so simply having liberty, just saying, well, everyone is free to say whatever they want, well, that doesn't actually give us liberty. That doesn't actually restrain the government. That may be an important aspect of it. But what is far more important is the fact that other parts of our society provide natural checks against the government. And if we simply wait for the government itself to do this, we simply wait for the mechanical instantiation in the Constitution to step in and stop the overreach of the government, then slowly totalitarianism will creep in through the democratic mechanism, which is a big part of the book.
Yeah, and that's so well said. And I was just speaking in the last segment with my guest about this Gen Z push toward a theocracy, which is basically this idea that instead of going back to these other restraints on a culture like the church and its influence, now the Gen Z proposition to combat all of this evil is to just force basically a Christian version of totalitarianism, which is the complete antithetical political theory to liberty and freedom. And so we obviously have to define liberty and freedom properly. It's not just the ability to do whatever we want, that has to be restrained, but it's also not forcing people to a certain religious faith by the state. It's to give more and more opportunities for the church to pervade the culture with the message of truth. And I think that's what's being lost, is that our First Amendment specifically protects the right of the church to do its job in culture and society.
I think a lot of people might be surprised to learn that until the incorporation of the First Amendment, state churches were actually relatively normal in the United States. It was understood that there would never be an overall countrywide creation of a theocracy, as you're saying here, but it was understood that there was particular ways of being, particular forms of especially Protestantism that would come to dominate the culture and even the government life of the different states and regions. And so I think it's important, again, to not just make this an idea that we need to come in and sweepingly reform this at the federal level to impose this top down, but also to remember that it's not about excluding or completely denying the fact that Christianity and the idea of course, God-given law has been central to our ability to self-govern. The founders, again, were very clear about how our Constitution was to work. Adams said that the Constitution was for a moral and religious people, and it was inadequate to govern any other. That means that we have to be virtuous first before we can be free. Freedom doesn't just bring virtue. And so while it is important for us to go ahead and probably secure that ability to live in a justly ordered society so that we can inculcate virtue, we have to understand that is of course a community and family thing first, but it does also incorporate its way into the body politic.
Yeah, so well said. And Eric Metaxas speaks about this in his book about the golden triangle of freedom. That you have to, that faith begets virtue, and then virtue begets liberty, and liberty is premised, of course, on faith. And you have to have that golden triangle if you really genuinely want liberty. So, just in the last minute that we have with you, Auron, and of course we could talk a lot further on this. What is the solution that you propose in your book?
The solution I propose in the book is the fact that I think that the large managerial structures that have abstracted many of the Christian principles that were at the founding of our country into these very disembodied ideas that have no connection to the original Christianity and faith are starting to come apart. And in order to go ahead and bring that virtue back, we have to rebuild our communities. We have to rebuild the small, and in particular, the local. We have to return to that virtue that allows us to go ahead and bind ourselves to that ethos that really made America what
Yeah.
it is.
So well said, Auron MacIntyre. And the book is called The Total State: How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies. And the church needs to do its job in society, and church has to engage politics. If you only have politics without theology, you'll end up where America is currently at. We'll be back with more tomorrow here on Jenna Ellis Tonight.